such a thing. But
Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 167th episode of my series, where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it has, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. So honestly, this is such an iconic instrumental album, I easily could have covered it 100 uploads ago, as DJ Shadow's game-changing debut is in that absolute top tier of instrumental LPs in hip-hop, which for me include projects like Donuts by Jay Dilla, Since I Left You by the Avalanches, and Model Soul, the final release from the godfather of lo-fi, Nujabes. Really the only reason I've taken so long to get to Introducing, despite it being one of the oldest records in my collection, is honestly due to how massive this experience is, making it one of the densest albums in the genre to unpack, even though DJ Shadow himself doesn't say one word. To me, this is the epitome of creativity and not just hip hop, but music in general. And it's one of my go-to examples whenever I hear some dumb spewing nonsense about how rap and hip hop aren't music, and how sampling is just stealing without any talent or skill. This totally ignores how much repurposing and recontextualizing a dude like Shadow does with his work. But moreover, the art of sampling in general gives us a medium where we can hear a product we never would have been able to create otherwise. And I think that's the biggest aspect that people who make these crusades against rap music and sampling don't understand. As all encompassing as this genre and culture can be, it's definitely fair to say there's certain styles of music that aren't as commonly incorporated into hip hop as the usual staples like soul and jazz. For example, up until the last decade or so, with a lot of the SoundCloud, goth boy click type of shit, it wasn't exactly popular to incorporate folk music into hip hop, but DJ Shadow was already breaking down these barriers all the way back in '96 by meticulously crafting an experience that defies being pigeonholed to any one singular style. There is one more recent artist who I was obsessed with in high school who I see as a very direct descendant of Shadow, especially with their shared tendency to experiment with different genres. That being a real true titan of modern underground rap, Lil Ugly Mane. He was one of the first ones to start this trend of kind of reaching back to the 90s. For the type of production guys like 3 6 Mafia and DJ Screw were really putting on the map, but giving it a sort of new modern age twist. But while he arguably perfected that style on his Mr. Thug Isolation album, much of his other work gets so experimental that he takes it to areas most other artists would never really dream of touching, from country to hardcore punk to black metal to noise. This dude draws zero boundaries between different forms of music. So if that concept interests you and you're a fan of DJ Shadow's work, I would definitely recommend checking out albums like Volcanic Bird Enemy and The Voice Concern, Third Side of Tape and Oblivion Access. Back to the project at hand, though, it isn't like Shadow is just pulling from all these genres just for the sake of being experimental and different. Every chop, loop, and stab in Introducing is totally calculated and necessary. It's all a means to building a grand hip hop based experience where even the most stingy detractor would have no choice but to eat their words about how it isn't music or takes no skill to partake in. Honestly, I don't know how anyone can look at someone like Shadow or DJ Qbert and say DJing alone isn't an art. But either way, this LP really couldn't be less like the odd instrumental project you'll hear, where it's clear someone just dragged and dropped some drum packs and made a bunch of boring, uninspired loops. This thing is the opposite of that, because there's really not a single beat that doesn't morph and change, usually multiple times within one track, culminating in this experience that just breaches an hour, but it can trick you into seeming longer with how much the songs wind and build. He even slyly references this practice and type of structuring with the title of the second track on Introducing, with the song Building Steam with a Grain of Salt, sort of being a metaphor about the ability to create a new, fleshed out musical experience from just a tiny piece of sample material. That is, if you have the knowledge, talent, and hunger to execute it properly. But besides his inhuman technique and skill as a disc jockey, the tendency DJ Shadow had to separate himself from what everyone else in his field was doing had a lot to do with aesthetics and the public's perception of what the DJ's role actually is. As Shadow would tell you himself, when he first attempted putting a foot into the game during the early 90s, there was honestly less than no place for him, as the idea of a DJ performing without an MC was a pretty ludicrous idea at the time, let alone to release an entire album by themselves. To quote Shadow directly from an old interview, he said to be a club DJ at that time, you had to have a certain panache that just it wasn't in me. In other words, he didn't feel comfortable doing the poppy, flashy kind of EDM type of DJing that was beginning to dominate. You can get a good hint of this from the album cover alone, which has always been one of my all-time favorite pieces of album art, without a doubt. Shadow just hunting for records, presumably even digging for samples to use on the album it ended up being the cover for, is a perfect representation of why Shadow kind of felt like the odd man out in the contemporary club scene. As far as I know, this actually gives DJ Shadow the insanely prestigious title as the first person in hip-hop to ever release an instrumental project, or at the very least, the first one in this vein. I'm sure beat tapes existed to some degree already, but when it comes to an actual experience that's crafted solely through sampling and drum programming, with zero intention of having any rappers on it, this guy kinda stands alone. From my research, pretty much all the legendary and memorable LPs that we traditionally classify as instrumental albums didn't really start rolling out until around 1999 or 2000. Though I do believe Dr. Octagon actually did release the beats from their timeless debut, Dr. Octagon Ecologist, without the vocals the same year as DJ Shadow's debut here, which was 1996. Funnily enough, if you remember my video a little while back where I discussed that Dr. Octagon project, you may recall I mentioned that DJ Shadow is actually one of the featured producers on that concept album, as if he didn't already have his hands in enough classic material. And there's a good amount of legends on a similar caliber who he's continued to collaborate with over the years. Shadow has always kept a pretty close proximity to hip-hop. I wouldn't say he's really in the realm of someone like Burial, who's another insanely talented and influential producer, with an uncanny ability to twist and morph samples with a very hip-hop production approach, but he overall kind of falls more on the electronic music side. I think this really shines through on some of his later work, especially with albums like The Outsider, The Mountain Will Fall, or the second half of Our Pathetic Age. But with this debut record here, Shadow holds your attention the entire time with nothing but samples, and even with all the experimentation and progress over the last 30 years, to me there's no sample-based album quite as seamless as this one. I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure. But this very well may be the first album I've covered on the channel where, from what I can tell, there's absolutely nobody listed as a collaborator. Be it producers, MCs, DJs, or even engineers, not one soul contributed to this thing from the credits I see, outside of the plethora of artists he pulls from for sample material. Even though this thing is best played as a singular experience from front to back, for honorable mentions on here, I'd choose the Number Song, Changeling, Stem/Long Stem Medley, Transmission 2, Mutual Slum, Organ Donor, Napalm Brain/Scatterbrain, Medley, and What Does Your Soul Look Like Part 1 or Blue Sky Revisit. When it comes down to my three favorite tracks overall, I think I would have to go with Building Steam with a Grain of Salt, What Does Your Soul Look Like Part 4, and Midnight in a Perfect World. Thank you for watching my 167th video. Next time we have another all-time great behind the boards. So look out for that one, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite songs are from the debut of this godfather of instrumental hip-hop. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.
Who would do such a thing? But look, I stand in the flame of a feeling we call pain. Father's Day mug, little hand shaped in clay. Carrier planes flew overhead in pockets.